Before we begin the video, if you haven't yet, come on down and join my Discord server. Link is down in the description. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel for our very first Season 13 episode review. First though, I want to remind you guys and any newcomers how these reviews work. So usually I do a brief analysis or summary of the episode first, and then I discuss the good stuff, the bad stuff, and then final thoughts about characters, plot, emotion, and action, and lastly a final score out of 10. So with all that having been said, let's begin our review of the season premiere Shintaro. So the episode starts off very casually. We see Cole and Lloyd playing Prime Empire, which looks to have been finished, and then we also see Jay and Nia outside raking leaves. Wu, meanwhile, is feeling sad because he realizes recently the ninja haven't really needed him on missions, so Misako and Lloyd try to cheer him up. Then the godly postman shows up, and the ninja receive a letter from Shintaro Mountain, and they've all been invited to celebrate Vanya's birthday. Lloyd mentions the Teapot of Tyran and Garmadon, and this episode also marks the first appearance of both Misako and the postman since episode 98. Misako convinces Wu to go, and they all set sail in the recently redesigned Bounty, but on the way they're attacked by some bats and almost crash. Luckily though, the guards of Shintaro save them and lift them up into the Ivory City, which is where the episode ends. So first things first, this episode has a lot of references and 2 returning characters, which is great. I will always be a fan of these harmless references and returning characters, even if the character is sometimes annoying like Dareth. Also, aside from one small Asphira reference in episode 12, season 12 doesn't even acknowledge the fact that season 11 exists. However, this episode seems to solve that because it references seasons 11 and 12 numerous times, and a lot of this comes up in Wu's story in this episode. Wu kind of feels like he isn't really needed as much anymore, mainly because of the last 2 seasons, and how his role was pretty small. Now, I don't think Wu in this episode is great or bad, but somewhere in the middle. I mean, I do have some concerns we'll discuss later, but for now I feel like it's good that they tied those last 2 seasons in. And this episode may start kind of casually, but that's totally okay. You know, I'm fine with seeing a glimpse into the ninjas' lives every once in a while when they're not adventuring. It's kept to a perfect amount, just a few scenes here and there before the main plot begins. And I feel that idea works well with the 11-minute format. You know, I think this episode definitely would have dragged on had it been 22 minutes. This episode also has a few humorous moments here and there, like Wu implying Misako is old and Jay getting carried off by a bat. That scene where Misako yells at Wu felt a little out of place to me, but it was alright. And lastly, I felt the episode was ended in a very nice way with that majestic soundtrack and finally arriving at the city. Now, I don't really feel much for the fight scene in this episode. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I just don't really feel it needed to happen. It just doesn't feel memorable to me in the slightest, and I feel like it was kind of shoved into this episode. Premieres like Season 11 and Season 12 definitely had better fight scenes, and fight scenes that felt like they belonged to the story more. If it were up to me, I would have had the ninja actually meet the royal family in this episode, and structure it more like episode 75. I also feel this premiere isn't really a super strong start to the season. And I'm not saying it has to be, but those kind of episodes are definitely better in my opinion. I mean, I guess you had the ending, which was pretty good, and the invitation scene, nothing special though, but the rest of the episode was just casual moments and a fight scene. I guess I just don't feel this episode was that exciting, but that's okay because episode 2 is pretty good. And as for a few minor things, I don't like how the bounty got redesigned off screen again without any explanation. I guess in season 8 it was one thing since everything got redesigned, but here, I don't know. I feel like a very small explanation like, hey, we did renovations, may have helped. And also I felt Lloyd's voice was a bit off in this episode. It felt very high pitched, especially at the start. And for some final thoughts, the plot definitely could have been more exciting, but it wasn't bad either. As for characters, nobody really stood out in the sense that they were great in this episode, but it was awesome to see Misako and my homie the postman back. The action here felt very forced, and I know I complain a lot about forced action, but I just don't really feel it contributed much to the episode. And lastly, emotion, you have Wu's moment, which seems good so far, but I do have one concern. I feel like this definitely needs to be expanded upon in later episodes. This needs to be Wu's character arc. This cannot be limited to one episode. This really shouldn't be a cheap one-episode emotion pull. It is a very interesting story and something that needs to be followed up on. Anyways, my final rating for this episode will be a 7.5 out of 10. I think this was a good episode, but not great. I feel like it definitely could have been improved in some areas. It isn't necessarily the most exciting premiere, but that's okay. It was awesome to see characters like Misako and the postman back. Anyways though, thanks for watching guys. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, share with anyone and everyone you know. Tomorrow we'll be back to review episode 2 Into the Dark, so stay tuned for that. Be sure to explain your thoughts on episode 1 Shintaro down below, and I'll see you next time.